Welcome to the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast with Garrett Williamson. Health, wellness, exercise, nutrition, and a whole lot more. Got questions? Call us and leave a message at 251-278-EDGE or message us at Personal Edge Fitness on Facebook and Instagram, at Team PE on Twitter, or personaledgefitness.com.
And I appreciate you being with us today. We're going to be talking about a topic that I speak about quite often in a variety of different ways because it's so incredibly important. It's one of those that I attribute to what we call aging. Now, if you listen to the 5-part series that I did on the live aging, you'll know that I talk a lot about the lack of things that we do. The things we stop doing. Activity is one of them. Nutrition is another. And the changes that we do in our lifestyle that cause health damage or health effects, different health effects, and of course, mindset. Those are the 4 different components of ability, or fitness, nutrition, lifestyle, and mindset. And usually it's a cutting back of things that we do that causes a lot of problems. Well, the topic today is mobility. And the reason I bring up this particular topic is that it's a big topic. And there's a lot to cover here. And like most of the topics that I talk about, it's easy to go down a rabbit hole on these particular issues, but I'm going to try to give you a general idea of the concepts of mobility and why it's so important as far as longevity is concerned. I mean, one of the biggest reasons, and I talked about this in the Balance podcast and the Balance radio show that I did, is that the incidence of mortality jumped by 2/3 with your first hip fracture. So you're 66% more likely to die after your first hip fracture. Now, there's nothing inherent about the hip being fractured itself that causes death. That's not it whatsoever. But you become more immobile. For a while, you become almost completely immobile, but you become far more immobile after your first hip fracture. Now, if you have a hip fracture and you have the hip replaced and you do your PT correctly, hey, you can get as mobile as you were before the hip fracture. But for a time, in most cases, people become a little less mobile. Even if they have a hip replacement, it's now in their head. They've got this weak hip, so they make themselves less mobile. And lack of mobility can increase your chances of death. There's been tons of studies. The Journal of American Medical Association does copious amounts of articles on mobility and morbidity, and mobility increasing your chance for death. Researchers at the University of Alabama at Birmingham looked at dozens of mobility studies published over years, and they've discovered common factors that lead to loss of mobility, such as people's lifestyle changing, therefore they're causing low physical activity, obesity, impaired health, and strength and balance. And the reason that they were looking at all these different things is because mobility was getting strongly linked to death. And so that's why I find it so important to talk about and do a podcast on this idea of mobility. What are things that lessen mobility? How can we increase our mobility? How can we maintain our mobility? I had a lady just come in today, as a matter of fact. She has a good friend of hers. And of course, we typically, like most people do, and please don't feel bad if you're one of these people that have done this, we are trained to think that age has anything to do with any of this. And it's not. It's strictly a coincidence. It really is. Age does not cause these things. But of course, when this very sweet lady was talking about her friend that she wanted to come in and see me, first thing she told me, she was in her 80s. And that was the first thing she told me. The second thing she told me, that she just started shuffling. She started shuffling. She's becoming more unstable, more imbalanced, and she's grabbing on her significant other, who is also unstable, unbalanced, and she's terrified of a fall. And this is something that, as time passes on the calendar, and we change our lifestyle, and we change our activity, and we change our nutrition, we change our mindset, this typically is the cause. We start becoming less balanced, we start becoming less mobile, and therefore have a chance when we become terrified of falling. Whereas when we first learned to ski, we pretty well look forward to falling. I mean, you knew it was going to happen. You weren't worried about it. But like you are on the ski slopes, when you hit your first double black diamonds, you're a little afraid of falling on those big boulders and rocks and what have you. If you haven't hit that stage already, imagine feeling like that every day. Imagine feeling like that when you're walking around. I mean, you just get up out of your chair and you want to cross the room, and you have that fear, that terror of falling, because you know if you fall, you're going to get injured. Well, that's why understanding mobility, understanding how we change our mobility and how we can actually keep from changing our mobility or increase our mobility becomes extremely, extremely important. So I'm going to give you some reasons for immobility, which will pretty well tell you a lot of the answers on how to increase your mobility, but reasons for immobility. And one of the first, and you've heard me say this before, I'm sure, especially if you've listened to the balance episode, which has a lot to do with the mind, but it has a lot to do with the physical side of balance. You know, your cerebellum controls balance in your brain. That's very important. But the physical side of it, we stop doing things. And one of the things we stop doing is we stop moving laterally. We stop moving sideways. It is as simple as that. We don't play tag anymore. We're not trying to juke anybody on a football field anymore. we're not playing tennis, we're running sideways, we have no reason to step side to side. We stop dancing, whatever it is. So we stop our lateral movement. And like anything, if you don't use it, you lose it. And so we stop doing those lateral movements. We stop maintaining the strength in those muscles that are around the hips, and therefore it deteriorates and we're not able to move sideways. Therefore, we become a little more dawdled, a little more awkward, a little more wobbly. And the reason we're wobbled is because if we're straight forward and backward, we're fine. But if we have the slightest movement sideways, just leaning over a little bit, we cannot bring our leg out fast enough to catch ourselves. And we can't do those minor corrections in our feet that you don't even notice that you do every single day, and you become less mobile. There's also things that cause us to be immobile, and it's usually through injury. But we do this over time. We believe that as time passes on the calendar, our joints just wear out. That just happens. No, not necessarily. Not on a machine that rejuvenates itself within every 365 days. Many parts of it rejuvenates even faster than that, a lot faster than that. But you're not just going to wear your joints out over time unless you're doing something improper, whether it's the activity or it's nutrition or you're just doing damage to it. You're hitting your knee with a baseball bat. Now, if you do that on a regular basis, you're pretty well going to blow out that knee. You're going to have problems there.
Or you owe Fat Tony money.
Yeah, that could be the case. That could be the case. So, yeah, definitely. So, but improper technique can cause damage to our joints, and therefore it can cause us to become more immobile. I'm sure you've probably heard me talk about this before, and the biggest things I talk about is the fact the majority of the world does not know how to sit down correctly and stand up correctly. Instead of sitting down and bending at the waist, using counterbalancing your weight and pushing your rear end backwards to sit down. More importantly, if you sit in a boardroom or if you sit in a restaurant and you can see people's feet and you watch them stand up. As soon as they push that chair away from the table, the first thing you're going to see them do is they're going to put their feet behind them. They're going to back their feet up. Immediately pull their feet backwards. That's going to put your knees over your toes, and they're doing what we call a quad dominant squat or quad dominant standing up. Putting pressure on the knees. Probably don't even feel it. Don't even notice it. I had somebody I did that. I was correcting their squat, and I said, look, you're sitting down wrong. They said, I know, but it didn't hurt at all. Well, right now it doesn't, but it's doing just a little bit of damage every single time you do it wrong. And therefore you end up with joint trouble, which causes more immobility. Like I was telling you about my friend that wanted her friend to come in here. Well, this is part of the reason she's slowing down. Joints are hurting. She's got less muscle engagement. Therefore, she is causing herself to be far more immobile. Another thing it causes is incorrect lifting. You're not just lifting yourself, but bending over, picking things up. You can cause back damage. You can cause knee damage, even shoulder damage. That's the incidence of rotator cuff just skyrocketed when they came out with plastic bags instead of paper bags, because people were lifting several plastic bags on one arm, lifting it up and out away from them, which was causing damage to the rotator cuff. Well, slow, incorrect lifting over time can cause problems in the joints and therefore cause you to be immobile. The imbalances, I'm taking a pause there because I'm getting into all these things that can cause immobility, and I really want to get to correcting them, but just to make sure that you know what we're talking about, make sure it's not just the legs. Lack of back strength can cause these problems. Anytime you've got an imbalance, your different muscles are made to control certain parts of your body. When they're not doing their job, other parts have to jump in and help out, and that's going to cause an imbalance. And you can have something that you're doing with your shoulder that can actually cause problems eventually in your ankle because your shoulder's weak, therefore the back has to help out, which makes you bend over a certain way, which puts more stress on your left hip, which actually causes your quadricep to engage and push out sideways a little bit, and therefore it tweaks your ankle. I know that sounds like a funny story, but that's exactly what happens when you have imbalances in your body. You can cause problems elsewhere, and lack of back strength is one of the big ones that actually can cause immobility. All right, folks, you know that sound there. Every time you hear that sound, I want you taking in water. Hydration is extremely important. I want to make sure everybody is trying to take in or successfully taking in 100 ounces of water a day. Water is fantastic. It is the magic pill. I have a podcast that talks all about the magic pill. That is water. It cuts cravings. It lubricates joints. It keeps you well. It's the best fitness nutrition advice I can possibly give you. So everybody, every time you hear that sound, I want you taking in water. Now back to our immobility or things that cause immobility. Let's go to the brain. We talked about back damage, we talked about knee damage, we talked about hip replacements. How about the brain? The brain causing immobility. Stay with me on this.
I thought you were going with brain replacement, and I was going to suggest a few candidates, but we'll leave politicians out of it.
Yeah, fair enough. Non-political talk on the Personal Ed Fitness podcast. Okay, that was A on the list there, Pablo. We're going to move down to B now as far as reduced brain efficiency. So anyway, the biggest part of that, there's several different factors in there. The most important one that I want to focus on is the cerebellum. But the cerebellum controls our mobility. It controls our balance and our agility. And as I've talked about in the Balance podcast, I talked about when you're working on your agility, your ability to move your legs in and out of tires and things like this. Whenever you're working on agility, you're actually working on balance at the same time. Then when you're working on balance, you're actually working on agility. And the reason I say that is that they come from the same spot in the brain, which is the cerebellum. And when you're developing the cerebellum, when you're little, you start off developing it when you're a child. You're heavily encouraged to stand up. You're heavily encouraged to walk across the room. And people, I'm sitting here doing it right here when I say that, people clap their hands. Come on, you can do it. You got it. Come on across the room. And you'll see a toddler kind of wobbling a little bit and trying to make it across the room. Well, the reason they're wobbling and teetering like theirs is because their cerebellum's not developed. That line of communication, those neurotransmitters in the brain are not communicating well. They're learning to communicate. And the way I describe that is that the neuropathways in your cerebellum are actually, when you're a child, are like a dirt road. As far as communication is concerned, their dirt path communication is not getting up and down it very well, not traveling on that dirt path very well. Then all of a sudden it kind of becomes a 2-lane road when you're a child. You have that low center of gravity, therefore you're able to jump up and run around on things and start stepping on curbs, and adults look at you and say, oh my gosh, your balance is incredible. Gosh, I wish I had that. Well, low center of gravity and an enhanced cerebellum causes these things. And because you're able to balance on a curb and do these kind of silly things and play in tag, and since you're able to do it, you start doing more of it. Start playing sports. You start playing tag. You start challenging your balance. Therefore, that dirt road that became a paved road now is a 4-lane highway. And at the paramount of your active state, wherever that is, should be all the way up until you pass away. But the paramount of your being active state, you're at the highest point of cerebellum activity. And that's when it's like an 8-lane superhighway. Well, it can go backwards the exact same way that it went forward. In other words, you stop playing sports and you kind of stop balancing on a curb. You gave up tag a few years ago. You stop moving sideways. You stop doing anything that challenges your balance or agility. And I mean, it can be something as simple as not stepping on a crack because you're going to break your mama's back. Anything that we do to lessen our balance and agility work, to lessen the activity that our cerebellum has, the more that causes that 8-lane superhighway to start gaining some weeds again. And pretty soon, 2 of the outer lanes aren't passable anymore. And now we stop exercising on a regular basis. Or we do some simple exercises, but we don't do anything that really moves sideways. We don't do any kind of lateral movement. We really don't like the multi-hip machine at the gym. And now 2 more lanes go. Now we're back to that 4-lane paved road. And you can see what happens. As you start to decrease those things, those activities that challenge your balance in your cerebellum, the more it starts going back to that dirt path again. And if you think about it, a toddler and a senior, somebody in their 80s, if you watch them walk, a lot of times they look the same. They have to be held up. You have to watch, make sure they're not wobbly, make sure they're not quote unquote losing their balance. And we look at it when we pass a certain age and we think, oh my gosh, you've hit that age where you just magically lose your balance. Let's go to the doctor and find if there's a drug we can take because our balance just left. No, it's very, 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 very simple. It's just like if I took that toddler and I didn't challenge that toddler to stand up, to walk on a curb, to walk across the room to me, to play sports. If I didn't do that, that cerebellum wouldn't develop. Therefore, their mobility would be affected. Now, it's a lot on the cerebellum, I know, but it starts in the brain, folks. And keeping that brain challenged is as important, if not more important, than the physical strength of maintaining mobility. Keeping those hips strong, keeping those quadriceps, those hamstrings strong, making sure that every muscle's opposing muscle is strong, making sure you're maintaining a balance that way. Now, I bring that up for a reason. That's what causes a muscle pull. If your quadricep has an opposing muscle, it's called a hamstring. Your bicep has an opposing muscle, it's called a tricep. Every muscle has an opposing muscle. The ones that cause your wrist to straighten out are opposed by the ones that cause your wrist to curl up. If you've got muscles in your neck that cause your ear to dip down to the right side, you've got muscles in your neck that cause your left ear to dip down to the left side. In other words, pull it back. You want to make sure there's always imbalance, and especially in your legs. If you have an imbalance, you can cause more damage and you can cause immobility. So it's important to have a balance in your muscles. It's also important to maintain your balance as far as cerebellum and physical activity. How do you increase mobility? Pretty simple. In fact, it's very simple. And it's probably the reason why I'm doing this podcast is the fact that too many people attribute lack of mobility to time passing on a calendar. And that kills me. It drives me nuts. If you believe that, or if you have a health professional that is telling you that the reason that you're less mobile is because of time on a calendar, please tell that individual that I called him a liar, and then give him this number, 251-341-0927, and tell him to call me. I'd love to talk to him about it because it has nothing to do with time passing on the calendar. Let me start off with the exercise. Let me start with the physical side of this. Things to do to increase mobility. Number one is hip strength. Now, talking to physical therapists, I don't know the exact number, but I would guess because of what we see and what we deal with, a large part of what they deal with on a daily basis is hip strength. They're doing exercises for hip strength because this is something that isn't done on a regular basis in normal exercise. Anything that moves forward and backward, treadmill, elliptical, bike, typically isn't going to engage the hips very much. Therefore, the hip muscles are going to start to deteriorate. So machines that do that, they're inner outer thigh machines, which many men think they don't need to do. They think those are women machines, and men don't have those muscles, so therefore they don't work those muscles. I tell you, probably the strongest evidence of lack of lateral movement or hip strength in a fitness setting is the multi-hip machine. Now, you may or may not know what that machine is. It's a machine, you stand on it, it has a big swing arm, it adjusts all kinds of different ways, and you hook your leg over it, under it, what have you, and move your leg in a variety of different ranges of motion. And used to be very common. You used to see them in gyms all the time. You see them, I don't think there's a single physical therapy clinic that does not have a multi-hip machine in it because they're so important. But the biggest sign I've seen that I know of people not working their hips is the lack of seeing those machines in gyms. And the reason you don't see them in gyms is because, one thing, they're challenging to work. They can be complicated. A lot of gym goers, gym participants, don't know how to use the machine. The sad thing is the majority of trainers, especially weekend certified personal trainers, people without a degree, don't know how to work them. Many of them have never seen a multi-hip machine. This is the one machine, when done right, would maintain your hip strength. We wouldn't even be having this podcast about mobility if the majority of people that do an ab machine would work a multi-hip machine. But the usage of that machine has gone down so much that the large manufacturers of that particular machine, Cybex and what have you, don't even make one anymore. It's hard to find one. So working that hip strength, understanding how to use those types of machine has an amazing effect, a life-changing effect on your mobility. And making sure that if you don't know how to do those, you don't know an exercise regimen for increasing hip strength, very simple, extremely simple. And of course, if you contact us at Personal Edge Fitness, we'll be more than glad to take you through one, design a program for you. Even if you have a gym membership elsewhere, we'll be glad to set up and design that program for you to increase and maintain hip strength. It's extremely important.
Now, you said there are some people who wouldn't even know what that is, what that machine is at all.
Yes.
That seems like taking your car to a mechanic who doesn't know what a socket wrench is.
You're exactly right.
Why would you go to that gym if they're not even aware of what it is?
I'll tell you how scary it is. There was a client that had worked out. This is a facility I worked in over 20 years ago. And the guy that owned the facility had a degree. It was questionable, but he did have a degree in the field. He had a client that had experience with that. And he was talking to a physical therapist. We developed a relationship with some physical therapists and talking to a physical therapist who insisted, you need to get one of these machines for your facility. He got it in the facility. I was ecstatic. A multi-hip machine is fantastic.
Right.
When he got so intimidated by it and not knowing how to work it, he sold it.
Really?
True story.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. Now, there's some personality problems with that particular individual too, but they were so intimidated by how to work the machine, they actually got rid of it.
Well, on the bright side, the personality problems come free with purchase when you get your degree from the online University of North Jakarta.
Absolutely. You're exactly right. So there's no extra charge for that. I mean, it really is free with price. You're right about that. So, okay, I've sufficiently beat hip strength, but that's not all of it. Can't be all of it. And it isn't. It isn't. Knee strength is very, very big. That's the next weakest link going down in the leg. Is first thing your hips and then of course knees. And knee strength is extremely important. Now I went back to, I was telling you about people standing up the wrong way and how that degenerates the knee by putting undue pressure on your knee joint and how much damage you can do by hurting your knees. And if your knees are weak, then they're going to have a tendency to give on you. Either you're not going to be able to make minor adjustments which keeps you from falling, or you're going to be reluctant to move that leg fast enough to be able to catch yourself or make certain moves on what have you with your knee if it's not as strong or if it had some damage to it and you're just trying to avoid pain. So maintaining knee strength is extremely important. And obviously, for those of you that work out on a regular basis, that big muscle that's just above the knee on the front side of the leg, which is known as a quadricep or quads for short, that's important. But the one that really gets left out as far as knee strength is concerned is, believe it or not, it's on the back side of that muscle, and that's the hamstring. I call the hamstring the largest, most neglected muscle in the body. And you think about it. You've seen this before. The guy, man, he was doing great. He was a sprinter. He was world class. He was ranked number 1 in the world. He was at the Olympics, and he ran 100 meters, and he got almost to the end, but then he pulled it's never a quadricep. It's rarely a calf. It's always a hamstring. And the reason for that is because most people don't work their hamstrings sufficiently. They'll work their quadriceps a lot, but not work the hamstring sufficiently. And it's not a muscle that we exercise, that we use a lot on a regular basis. It doesn't aid in standing up. We can avoid using it when we're standing up. We can avoid using it very much when we're walking. Long distance runners don't activate their hamstring a whole lot, but it has a lot to do with knee strength. It has a lot to do with how much pressure you're putting on the knee and how much support the knee's getting. So knee strength is extremely important, and don't neglect the hamstrings when you're doing that. Another one is, we were talking about this earlier, back strength. And if you have back problems, or you know somebody that has back problems, you'll see that they tend to hold themselves a different way. They seem to hold themselves a bit rigid, and they're less apt to do a kind of a fast movement because they're worried about injuring their back. Well, by doing that, you're actually causing back weakness. By living that way, you're more apprehensive about doing certain moves, which can throw you off balance, which can put pressure on other areas. Remember I was saying earlier, when you have a weak muscle, it causes other muscles to recruit, come in and help out a little bit. Therefore, you cause an imbalance, which can cause damage. So maintaining back strength, especially in the lower back. Now, whenever I say back strength, one of the first things that comes to anybody's mind is the word for the 2000s, which was core. Core became very important. And core is important, don't get me wrong. But when people think of core, they think of abdominals. And that is important. But again, what we don't typically think of, like we don't think of the quadricep, we don't think of the hamstring, what we typically do not think of are the lower back muscles. One's known as the spinal erectors, or erector spinae, and the quadratus lumborum. These muscles that are on the lower back, the lower part of your spine, right above your rear end, they're kind of flat muscles. They're not massive. You're not going to have anybody flex and show you their erector spinae, but especially people that are doing too much ab work, because the abs, you don't need 40 different sets to work your abs. But if you're doing ab work, especially if you're doing ab work, you need to be doing some lower back work. Turn over on your stomach, do a simple hyperextension, pulling your shoulders off the mat and legs all the way up to the hip, pulling those off the mat at the same time, kind of you're putting yourself in kind of a reverse C. They call it a seal position, and lowering back down. That's something as simple as that. You can feel those erector spinae firing. You can feel those lower back muscles firing. And I argue you want to strengthen those first before you even worry about your abdominals. So very important to maintain back strength. Keep your abdominal strength up, but don't forget the lower back muscles. And one of the biggest, because people that will listen to this podcast, a lot of people that are interested in mobility, have mobility issues and questions, a lot of them have gone through joint replacement, or they've gone through some kind of major surgery. At that point in time, it is so incredibly important to return to exercise after that surgery, after that joint replacement. Go through your full round of PT. And remember, and all due respect to my PT friends out there, they typically work through third-party billing. They work through their insurance. And insurance companies, the returning to health is important, but nowhere near as important as, hey, let's get you to where you're moving again and let's get you out of here. So a lot of times in a physical therapy clinic, you don't have the opportunity to carry on once you get to a certain level, or you've run out of physical therapy through your insurance. Now, I don't blame the physical therapist for this for any reason. Our medical system is broken, and it has to do with the payment, and you get so many sessions of PT, and that's it. So continuing that is extremely important. And what I recommend doing, if you've been through physical therapy, you're going through physical therapy, or you've got that surgery coming up, start from day one asking that physical therapist, after I get through with this, what do I do then? And a good PT will recommend, hey, maintain these exercises. Good PT will recommend a good professional, a good personal trainer to continue on with afterwards. And I highly recommend, of course, somebody that's got a degree in the field that understands what's going on with your particular joint replacement or your particular injury. And the most important is making sure that that professional has relationships like we do with physical therapists, where we actually talk to the therapist, because every knee replacement is different, every hip replacement is different, every injury is different. And if your personal trainer, your health professional post-physical therapy is not willing to communicate with your physical therapist, you need to go elsewhere. How can we help? Well, we've had people with traumatic brain injuries, strokes, knee replacements, hip replacements, joint replacements, and we've been able to bring them back to 100%, if not better, by understanding all these different principles of how to maintain, keep, or go back to being far more mobile. It doesn't matter your age. It doesn't matter unless you've got some kind of, you're missing an entire leg. That will affect your performance. But if it's just a simple injury of a soft tissue that can be strengthened, you can get back to 100%. You can get back to better than you ever were. stay mobile, and stay living. This has been the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast. You're listening to Garrett Williamson. Always stay hydrated.
Thanks for listening to the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast with Garrett Williamson. Subscribe now and be a part of the show by calling 251-278-EDGE or message us on Facebook and Instagram at Personal Edge Fitness or at Team PE on Twitter, and visit us at personaledgefitness.com.